Hi everyone. We're continuing in John Wenham's book, The Goodness of God, and he is going to be speaking about the curse of the cross in the Bible. I wanted to spend, though, a few minutes just talking about something for those that are watching that are either witnesses or ex-witnesses, and that is that we spent an awful lot of time as witnesses, or at least I did, thinking about how to disprove that Jesus died on a cross, so that we sort of missed the significance of the whole thing, the death of Christ, and what it accomplished. We spent all our time trying to disprove that he died on a cross, and then we neglected to see the love of God in a very dishonoring death. And that was the point, not what he died on. So I wanted to read to you Paul's discussion of the death of Christ. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 to 24, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through the wisdom did not know him, or through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to those who believe, to save those who believe. Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews, and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God." Then in chapter 2, the first 2 verses, he says, "When I came to you, brothers, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." So his emphasis seems to be on the death of Christ, the crucifixion. How much time did you think about the crucifixion? And could you preach such a message as a Jehovah's Witness? Could that be the center of your message, the crucifixion of Christ? That is the central message of Christendom, of the mainline Christian church. What unifies the churches is the symbol of the cross. Paul, before the passage that we read, is talking to the Corinthians, and there is divisions going on within the church, people vying for position, or at least for following people. So Paul asked the Corinthians, "Did I die for you? Were you baptized into the name of Paul?" So we might ask, did the org die for you? And the scary thing is now they are asking Jehovah's Witnesses to be baptized in their name, put their loyalty to them. It's in complete opposition to what we see Paul talking about here. So I thought now we should read a little bit of Wenham's thoughts on the cross, the curse of the cross. He says, "The supreme example of the biblical curse is the cross of Christ. The Old Testament had laid down clearly that if a man is hanged, his body should not remain all night upon the tree. for a hanged man is accursed by God. To Paul, as a young rabbi, the fact that God allowed Jesus to hang on a tree was the decisive disproof of his messiahship. He was plainly cursed by God. It was only later, after he had seen the risen Christ, that he could endorse the testimony of the other apostles. What was their testimony? The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a tree. Then he recognized the marvelous truth that Jesus was both cursed for us and raised for us. He then says a little more about when Jesus is dying on the cross. We all are familiar with the words, the fearful cry that came from Christ near the end of his life, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Wenham comments, "For the first and last time in his earthly ministry, it is recorded of him that he did not address God as Father, but as my God." The evangelists do not explain why the perfect communion of Father and Son was cut off, why in the depths of his soul Jesus felt himself forsaken. They simply record the fact. Jesus, under the divine curse, was bearing away the sins of the world. This is the focal point in the history of the world. This act is the very heart of the gospel. Here, once for all, as the writer of the Hebrews delights to tell us, was sin dealt with. Its finality is brought out in John's account of the crucifixion. Sometime after the cry of dereliction, there followed the cry of triumph. It is finished. The work of atonement was finished. The ransom price of our redemption was paid. Now it was possible to proclaim to all men forgiveness of sins through Christ. The guilty one could go free, his punishment borne by another. The rebel could become a son through his union with the Son of God. The helpless could be recreated by the power of the divine Spirit in his heart. The Church of the New Covenant was bidden to keep this doctrine central to its life and worship by the observance of the Holy Supper. Again and again they were to remember the body broken and the blood poured out for the remission of sins. The Church was thus to feed her faith and nurture her life on this foundation truth. So it's so different from what we emphasized or thought about when we even thought about the death of Christ. The Church does things very differently. The church calendar revolves around the events of Christ's life and death. So we think of Advent season, which is leading up to the birth of Christ. So they spend a whole month before Christmas thinking about the coming of the Messiah, the birth of Christ. Then during Lent season, in many churches, they will sacrifice something, and it's to remind them of the sacrifice of Christ. It's to make you have it in your memory all the time, not just a day, which is kind of what we think in terms of. No, the Christian calendar makes you think about these things on a regular basis throughout the seasons. Then they celebrate Easter, the resurrection of Christ. And then at Pentecost, they have a celebration of the pouring out of the Holy Spirit. But the most common one is the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper, sometimes called Eucharist or Communion, is done frequently in the church. It's not a once-a-year thing, but frequently. depending on what church you go to. Some of them do it weekly, some even daily. Some do it monthly, some do it quarterly, but they do it frequently because they want that to be a focal point in their thinking, in their memory, something that they will think about, the death of Christ and what it accomplished. So I thought that we should think about this as witnesses, because we spent so much time concentrating on a negative instead of on the positive accomplishment of Christ's death. I'm going to link 3 videos on this one because I couldn't choose. The first one is the second of a series that David did on the cross, and this one was whether or not it's a pagan symbol, and part of the title was The Watchtower Agenda, Us versus Them. I believe that the Watchtower has accomplished putting a wedge in between Jehovah's Witnesses and Christendom, and for that purpose, so that we would not see what Christians see, or understand or come to understand their thinking and their emphasis and why it's there. It's a wedge between us. The second one is a video done called The Cross and the Name of God in Ezekiel and Revelation. And the third one is one that David did featuring James Orr. It is The Cross is the Good News Now. We can only enter the kingdom through the death of the King. So I thought those 3 videos would be helpful if you want to think more on this subject. Very important subject. Next, we're going to talk about what is God like from John Wenham's book.